What's going on, everybody? PojiForce here. You're watching PojiForce Plays, and today we're going to be talking about some of the lore in Dead by Daylight. As you may know, in Dead by Daylight, you are pitting a group of survivors against a ruthless killer at the behest of some supernatural creature simply known as the Entity. Today, we're going to be taking a look at what the Entity is, what its motivations are behind staging these trials, and why it picks the survivors that it does, as well as the killers. And I think that there might be one survivor in particular that the Entity might actually be afraid of. So what is the Entity? According to the wiki, the Entity is a cosmic embodiment of evil that turns worlds inside out with its very presence. This has been observed by the observer and his people when the Entity reached his homeworld. It corrupts its victims, slowly driving them insane and mad, and it uses that as a way to get a foothold in that particular world. The Entity travels from world to world, corrupting it in this manner, and then taking survivors and killers that it chooses in order to fuel its power. It usually picks worlds that don't really understand the metaphysical relationship between thoughts and the world that they live in. The Entity is largely described as an emotional vampire, which gains its sustenance in the form of strong emotions. In a sense, you could say it's kind of like Monsters, Inc., where it draws power from an emotional response. Very similarly, actually, the monsters would get the children to scream, aka express their fear, and that scream translated to energy. Except in Monsters, Inc., it turned out that laughter, aka joy, or happiness, was a much stronger energy source. I think if it was the same for the Entity, it would all be puppies and kittens and rainbows and love and joy instead of death, destruction, horror, and massacre. No. The Entity feeds on, above all else, fear, pain, suffering, the anticipation of a good kill, but above all else, fear. Probably the only positive emotion it feeds off of is hope, and that's probably more out of necessity than actual desire. Because if the survivors eventually run out of hope, then they give in to the despair, and then they become useless to the Entity. The Entity has a place where it puts useless survivors, but it likes to get as much value out of its survivors as it can. So it allows them to feel hope, and it'll even give them avenues to feel hope. But it doesn't necessarily value hope the same way it values things like pain and fear. So it always tries to pick survivors that seem like that they would be a good fit for this. All survivors taken by the Entity share certain common traits. All survivors have some form of emotional baggage, whether it's a sense of inadequacy, loneliness, depression, guilt, or the biggest of all, fear. Oftentimes, these strong negative emotions are associated with a loved one, a family member, a dear friend. All the survivors could also be seen as a means of inspiring hope and providing leadership to the others. Some have competitive spirits that drive them to excel, and in doing so motivate the others. Some are filled with boundless confidence or rebelliousness that could be attractive to someone in a desperate situation. Some possess natural talent in leadership. Some are driven to find the truth. Some are so experienced with fear, they know how to deal with it and can guide the others. All the survivors were also alone when they were taken, in the dark, isolated, corrupted parts of the world, touched by the Entity's influence. These are the places where the Entity had the most reach, and also the places where the disappearance of someone could be most easily explained. All except for one. Michaela Reed has all the other signs of a survivor. She had that emotional baggage of losing her father, and then the Entity made her best friend and roommate disappear. She was a positive outlet in her community, a self-proclaimed witch that was loved and adored in her community, beloved at the coffee shop where she worked, and generally had a positive outlook on life. Where she differs is how she was taken. Michaela Reed, on stage and before a massive crowd of onlookers, was taken in plain sight. What's more, the Entity's foothold into her world was not particularly dark or evil or isolated. It was her home, her bathroom, her apartment that she shared with her best friend. After nights of nightmares, dreaming of being dragged into a basement and hung on hooks, she dreamed of the entity's realm without even knowing anything about it. As if her claiming to be a witch may not have been too far-fetched. When the entity took her roommate Julian, it was as if it was trying to dampen her spirit, to break her, to send her into a self-destructive spiral of depression and neglect, like so many other survivors before her. But she rose out of it anyway, in spite of everything, and gave the best performance of her life. And then the entity took her anyway. It was as if she was a threat to the entity's plans for that world. It wouldn't be the first time. Elodie Ricotta was driven to learn the truth, to discover what had happened to her parents in the Dyer's Island incident, and learn more about the entity. Felix Richter was another victim of the Dyer's Island incident, and at least had seen the entity in his world before, when he was young. While both of these survivors also had strong emotional baggage in the form of guilt and the loss of their parents, and also had different leadership traits, and were taken in isolated areas, both also were feasibly a threat to the entity's plans by prior knowledge of its existence. Michaela didn't have that. What makes me think Michaela might genuinely scare the entity is what she did when she got to the realm. She started taking totems, a gift to killers to drive fear and suffering into the survivors, and she started to bless them. A power that one would doubt she had in her own world. She was taking the evil realm of the entity and, at least in some small part, turning it against it. And what was worse, she was teaching the other survivors how to do it too. And if the survivors could start manipulating the world of the entity to suit them, does that mean the prisoners could eventually grow strong enough to overthrow the warden? Just something to think about. My 2 cents. Michaela Reed does seem like she might actually be the survivor that the entity is genuinely scared of. But that's it for this video. I really hope you enjoyed. If you did, please hit that like button and subscribe, and let me know what you think in the comments below. Thank you so much for making it to the end, and until next time everyone, I am PojiForce, and you guys, stay awesome. I'll catch you later.